something has already started shifting, even if they still pretend nothing has changed. There is a quiet realization forming, because what they once believed they could delay, control, or quietly withhold is now beginning to move beyond their reach. Something is unfolding in your favor, and the energy feels almost inevitable, as if the moment has already passed the point where anyone could stop it. The first energy carries emotional depth, like someone holding feelings carefully, almost protectively. A calm figure with a golden cup, suggesting that your sensitivity, your patience, your ability to remain steady even when things felt uncertain, has been silently shaping the outcome behind the scenes. There is wisdom here, emotional maturity, a quiet strength that did not need to prove itself loudly. And yet it has influenced more than they expected. Then the perspective begins to expand, and we see the image of someone standing at the edge of possibility, looking across distance with 3 staffs beside them, suggesting that plans may have already been set in motion, even if communication has not fully caught up yet. Someone appears to be realizing that what they postponed, what they hesitated over, is now progressing anyway. And the sense of control they thought they had may already be slipping away. And beneath everything, there is a deeper motivation connected to stability, connection, celebration, an image of figures beneath a floral arch, hinting that something meant to bring harmony, union, or emotional fulfillment has been quietly aligning in the background. This does not feel random. It feels like something that has been building steadily, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself, because whatever they once believed they could hold back now seems to be moving forward on its own timing. And the energy suggests that what is meant for you is no longer asking for permission. Let's take a closer look at what is truly unfolding here. And now something begins to accelerate. Almost suddenly, almost unexpectedly, as if events that once felt delayed are now picking up speed all at once. The energy shifts from quiet preparation into movement, real movement, the kind that no longer asks for permission. The image of wands flying through the air suggests momentum building rapidly, messages, realizations, or decisions arriving faster than they anticipated. Whatever was once held back, emotionally postponed, or carefully controlled, now seems to be moving forward on its own timeline. There is a feeling here that something has reached a tipping point, where silence can no longer hold the situation in place. Communication may begin to open, or intentions may become harder to conceal, because the energy itself is no longer standing still. It almost feels as though they are realizing that the window to delay this, to slow this down, is closing quickly. What they once believed could remain unspoken or quietly contained is now gaining momentum beyond their ability to manage. The pace feels different now, more direct, more inevitable, as if the truth itself is finding ways to travel, regardless of hesitation. There is also a sense that something is aligning behind the scenes, pieces coming together rapidly, timing shifting in your favor, movement replacing uncertainty. And while part of them may still be processing what this means, the energy suggests that what is meant to reach you is already on its way. The situation is no longer waiting, it is unfolding. And as this momentum builds, a deeper realization begins to surface, because what is moving toward you now is not only emotion, it is value, recognition, something tangible that can no longer be easily dismissed or withheld. There is a sense of someone becoming aware that what they once held tightly, perhaps believing they could control the outcome, is no longer fully in their hands. The energy feels grounded, steady, almost like someone sitting firmly protecting something they once guarded closely. yet beginning to understand that holding on too tightly may no longer serve them. This situation appears to be revealing an important truth about worth, about what cannot truly be kept from you when it is aligned with your path. Whatever was delayed may have required time for its stability to form, for intentions to become real rather than uncertain, for emotions to mature into something that carries substance. It feels as though the lesson here touches the idea that what is meant for you does not disappear simply because someone hesitated, and what they once tried to contain may now be showing signs of permanence. There is also an awareness emerging, Bassin, that control is not the same as security, and that something real cannot remain hidden indefinitely. What they may have attempted to withhold, emotionally or materially, now appears to be moving into a space where it becomes visible, undeniable, almost anchored into reality itself. The situation is revealing that what holds true value naturally finds its way forward, even when someone initially resists acknowledging it. And this realization may be quietly shifting the balance, because once something becomes real, once it begins to take form in the physical world, it becomes much harder to ignore what is unfolding. Something here is stabilizing, solidifying, preparing to show itself more clearly as the story continues to reveal what can no longer be as kept back. And beneath that quiet stabilization, there may have been more movement happening internally than anyone openly admitted. Almost as if someone has been trying to maintain control while feeling pulled forward at the same time. There is a sense of determination here, like holding the reins tightly, wanting to guide the outcome, yet beginning to realize that the direction is no longer entirely theirs to decide. What once felt manageable, predictable, contained, now carries a momentum that asks for honesty, asks for alignment, asks for courage to face what has already begun to take shape. It can feel like being carried forward even while part of the mind is still trying to calculate the safest route, as if opposing instincts are moving side by side. One part seeking emotional truth, another part still unsure how much can be revealed without changing everything. There may be pride involved, or the need to appear composed, to maintain the image of control. Yet underneath that exterior, something is becoming undeniable. The path ahead is becoming clearer, even if it means stepping outside of familiar patterns or expectations that once felt protective. Because when something real begins to anchor itself, it naturally asks for movement, and movement asks for decision. The energy suggests that hesitation is slowly giving way to acceptance, that the desire to hold back is gradually being replaced by the understanding that what is meant to reach you is already finding its way forward, guided by forces stronger than resistance. And as that understanding settles in, there is also a quiet awareness that this movement did not happen accidentally. Something has been taking shape gradually, step by step, almost like careful work being done behind closed doors, effort invested even when no one was watching. There is an indication that the distance once felt between intention and action has been slowly narrowing, as if someone has been studying what this connection truly means, trying to understand how to bring something intangible into form, how to transform possibility into something that can actually exist in the real world. It feels similar to observing progress take place piece by piece, like someone reviewing plans, adjusting their approach, realizing that what they once hesitated to pursue now deserves attention, deserves commitment, deserves the willingness to build rather than simply imagine. The energy suggests a process of learning, of recognizing that emotional truth requires participation, requires effort, requires the courage to move beyond observation and begin contributing to what is trying to manifest. Because once the future becomes visible, it quietly asks for preparation, and preparation often reveals how serious the intention truly is. There may be a growing recognition that what they tried to keep at a distance has already begun to root itself into reality. And now, the only direction left is forward. Through steady action, through thoughtful effort, through a willingness to create something that can no longer remain only yotai, an idea. And somewhere in this quiet progress, there is also an awareness of timing, a recognition that certain things cannot be rushed. Even when the desire to reach the outcome is already present, it feels like pausing beside something symbolic, almost like holding a delicate wreath, sensing that the moment of celebration must arrive naturally rather than being forced before its time. There may have been impatience before, or uncertainty about whether this connection could truly stabilize. Yet now, there is a deeper understanding that what is lasting often requires cycles, reflection, the willingness to allow things to unfold fully. The energy suggests that what they once tried to hold back may actually have needed time to mature, to become strong enough to exist beyond temporary emotion. There is a quiet shift from urgency into trust, as if someone is beginning to realize that what is meant to come together will not disappear simply because it was delayed. The presence of time itself seems to be part of the lesson, showing that what is real continues to move forward, even when progress feels slow from the outside. And this creates a subtle sense of reassurance, because stability built with patience tends to endure, forming something that can support both people rather than something fragile that easily dissolves. What was once uncertain now appears to be aligning at the right pace, allowing the foundation to strengthen quietly, until the moment arrives when what was once withheld can finally be shared openly, without fear that it will disappear again. And as this patience deepens, there is also a growing awareness that the movement now taking place is not chaotic. It is being guided by a need for balance, almost like someone carefully weighing what is fair, what is deserved, what can no longer remain uneven between you. The speed that once felt unpredictable begins to take on a sense of purpose, as if everything arriving now is aligning with a deeper sense of justice, an internal knowing that something must finally be given in proportion to what has been felt, invested, or quietly endured. It can feel like a moment where excuses no longer carry the same weight, where hesitation begins to lose its influence, because the truth itself is becoming undeniable. There may be a quiet recognition that what was once withheld created an imbalance, and now there is a desire to restore harmony, to make things right, to offer something openly, rather than keeping it suspended in uncertainty. The energy suggests that forward movement now carries accountability, an understanding that what is real must be acknowledged honestly if it is meant to continue growing. This creates a subtle but powerful shift, because when balance begins to return, things often move quickly, almost like events aligning naturally once resistance fades. What is coming forward now appears guided by a deeper fairness, ensuring that what reaches you reflects the emotional truth that could no longer be ignored, allowing what was delayed to finally arrive in its proper time. And within this returning balance, there is also the presence of intention becoming more solid, more deliberate, as if someone is no longer observing from a distance but beginning to stand firmly in what they truly value. The hesitation that once created distance now seems to be replaced with a quieter form of certainty, a willingness to hold something up clearly, almost like recognizing the true worth of what was once underestimated. There is a sense that stability here is not accidental. It has been earned through reflection, through time, through the gradual realization that what was withheld may have carried more importance than originally admitted. It feels similar to someone acknowledging that protecting their position or maintaining control did not ultimately provide the security they expected. And now, there is a readiness to invest in something real, rather than keep it at arm's length. The energy suggests a movement toward responsibility, toward showing consistency, toward offering something tangible that reflects genuine respect for the connection. There is also a quiet pride here, but not the kind that blocks progress, rather the kind that encourages someone to act with integrity, to build something that can endure rather than something temporary. Because when something is finally recognized as valuable, it naturally begins to receive the care and commitment it always required. Allowing what was once withheld to now be offered with intention, stability, and a clearer understanding of its true significance. And with that recognition settling in, there is also a quiet pause that seems necessary, almost like stepping back just enough to fully process what this new level of honesty truly means. The movement here is not rushed. It feels more reflective, as if someone is allowing themselves a moment of stillness, standing in place while emotions reorganize, trying to understand how everything has changed so quickly. There is a sense of suspension, like waiting in that delicate space between realization and action, where something important is being felt more deeply than before. It can resemble a moment of surrendering old assumptions, allowing perspective to gently turn, seeing the situation from an angle that was not visible before. When someone has spent so much time holding something inside, the shift toward openness can feel unfamiliar, almost like being suspended between what was and what is beginning to form. Yet this pause does not feel like resistance. It feels purposeful, as if clarity is quietly anchoring itself before the next step is taken. Because once truth is acknowledged internally, there is often a brief stillness where everything recalibrates, where priorities realign, where the emotional weight that was once avoided begins to feel meaningful rather than overwhelming. And in this space of quiet reflection, something new is preparing to move, not from pressure, but from genuine understanding. And as this understanding continues to settle, emotions that were once kept carefully contained may begin to surface more noticeably, almost like something held deep beneath the surface slowly rising on its own. There is a feeling here that what was once difficult to express, perhaps even difficult to admit to oneself, is becoming harder to ignore, as if the emotional current is gently but persistently pulling everything toward honesty. The movement now feels less about control and more about acknowledging what has always been present underneath, even when it remained unspoken. It can feel similar to realizing that certain feelings cannot simply be set aside once they have reached a certain depth, like waves gathering strength quietly, shaping the direction of thought and intention, even when no words have yet been exchanged. There may be a growing awareness that vulnerability itself is part of the process, that allowing emotions to exist openly does not weaken the situation, but rather clarifies what truly matters. Something internal appears to be softening, allowing guarded instincts to gradually give way to sincerity. And as this emotional clarity gains momentum, the distance that once felt necessary may begin to feel less important, because the truth itself is beginning to guide the response. What was once withheld now seems to be moving closer to expression, shaped by feelings that have matured enough to be recognized, and perhaps even shared. And as these feelings begin to move closer to the surface, there is also a growing awareness of reciprocity, a quiet recognition that what is being opened now cannot remain one-sided for long. The energy begins to lean toward balance, like something being gently placed back into equilibrium, where what is offered is met with presence, where effort begins to reflect effort. It feels less like uncertainty now, and more like an unspoken understanding, forming between two perspectives that are gradually learning how to meet in the middle. There is a sense that emotional honesty begins to invite a response, almost like extending something meaningful into the space between you, and noticing that it is not left unanswered. What once felt withheld may now begin to return in equal measure, not necessarily all at once, but in ways that show willingness, in gestures that feel sincere, in moments where mutual awareness quietly replaces doubt. The dynamic seems to move toward a more natural exchange, where giving and receiving begin to flow without the same hesitation that once created distance. Because when something real is acknowledged by both sides, the connection often begins to stabilize on its own, finding a rhythm that feels fair, supportive, and emotionally sustainable. And within that emerging balance, the direction becomes clearer, suggesting that what once felt restricted is now learning how to move freely, supported by a growing sense of mutual recognition. And as this rhythm begins to stabilize, there is a growing clarity forming, almost like a single point of truth rising above confusion, cutting gently through the uncertainty that once kept everything suspended. What was previously felt only emotionally now begins to take shape mentally as well, bringing a clearer understanding of what this connection actually means and what can no longer remain unsaid. The atmosphere shifts from questioning into knowing, not in a dramatic way, but in a quiet, steady realization that the situation has reached a moment where honesty feels not only possible, but necessary. It can feel like reaching a moment where perspective sharpens, where intentions become more defined, where someone begins to recognize that avoiding clarity would only prolong something that is already revealing itself. There is a sense that communication or understanding begins to move toward precision, like finding the exact words that were once difficult to articulate, or acknowledging a truth that has already been felt for some time. The energy here feels focused, intentional, as if the emotional journey is now supported by mental alignment, allowing choices to reflect what has genuinely been realized internally. Because when understanding and feeling begin to agree, movement often becomes simpler, more direct, guided by a sense of certainty that does not require force, only honesty. Something here is becoming unmistakable, quietly shaping the next step with clarity that feels both liberating and grounding. And as this clarity begins to settle into something more tangible, there is also an awareness of the emotional weight that has been carried quietly for longer than either side may have admitted. When truth finally begins to surface, it often brings with it the recognition of how much was held inside. Like thoughts circling repeatedly in the quiet hours, questions replaying, wondering whether the connection would ever move beyond uncertainty. This stage can feel intense, not because something is going wrong, but because everything that was once avoided is now asking to be acknowledged honestly. It can resemble the moment when the mind finally confronts what the heart already sensed, where worries that once felt easier to suppress begin to lose their power simply by being seen clearly. There may be a realization that much of the tension came from the fear of losing something meaningful, or from not knowing whether the feeling would ever be returned. And yet how, as understanding sharpens, the anxiety that once lingered in the background begins to transform into awareness, almost like recognizing that the imagined obstacles were never as immovable as they once seemed. Because when something becomes clear enough, the mental noise often begins to quiet, allowing space for decisions that feel grounded rather than reactive. The situation now feels closer to emotional resolution, not because everything is perfectly decided, but because the truth itself is no longer being avoided. And within this quiet settling, there is also a subtle realization that perspective itself has been shifting, almost as if something once seen from only one angle is now being viewed from an entirely different position. It feels like an internal pause, where someone is no longer trying to force an answer, but instead allowing understanding to come naturally, noticing how much has changed simply by looking at the situation more honestly. There may have been a period of feeling emotionally suspended, unsure whether waiting would ever lead to clarity. Yet now the inner landscape begins to rearrange itself, revealing that what once felt uncertain may actually hold deeper meaning than expected. It can feel similar to recognizing patterns repeating gently, like cycles moving quietly in the background, showing that timing was always part of the process rather than an obstacle against it. Something within this person appears to be softening, letting go of the need to control exactly how everything unfolds, and instead beginning to trust that certain connections evolve through phases that cannot be rushed. There is a sense of realization that what was delayed may have required space for emotional growth, for understanding to deepen, for truth to reveal itself without pressure. And as this internal shift continues, the resistance that once held things in place begins to loosen, allowing the energy to move more freely, guided less by fear and more by a growing sense that what is meant to unfold will continue revealing itself naturally. And as this resistance continues to soften, there is also a deeper emotional undercurrent that has been quietly shaping the pace of everything, almost like feelings that once felt too complex to fully articulate are now beginning to reorganize themselves internally. There may have been moments where someone attempted to maintain composure, to appear unaffected, to keep emotions contained beneath the surface. Yet internally the tide has been shifting, revealing that the distance once created by uncertainty is no longer providing the same sense of protection. It can feel like trying to remain steady while something meaningful begins to move gently beneath awareness, making it harder to deny how much this situation truly matters. There is a sense of vulnerability here that may not yet be openly expressed, but is becoming increasingly difficult to ignore. As if the heart is slowly recognizing that emotional control alone cannot sustain the connection in the way it once tried to. Something about this process feels cyclical, like revisiting the same emotional space, but each time with slightly more honesty, slightly less avoidance, gradually allowing feelings to exist without needing to immediately manage or suppress them. And within this quiet unfolding, the emotional distance that once felt necessary begins to lose its purpose, replaced by a growing readiness to experience the connection more authentically, even if that requires stepping into unfamiliar emotional territory. And as this readiness to experience the connection more authentically continues to unfold, there is also a deeper internal adjustment taking place, almost like someone is slowly realizing that balance cannot exist if they continue to hold back parts of themselves. It can feel like standing still long enough to recognize where effort has been uneven, where giving may have felt safer than receiving, or where receiving may have felt unfamiliar after a long period of emotional self-protection. Something within begins to acknowledge that true equilibrium requires vulnerability from both sides, a willingness to allow emotional exchange to move more naturally rather than cautiously controlling every response. There is a quiet recognition forming here, similar to realizing that the connection has already begun to influence the inner landscape more than expected, as if the heart has slowly leaned in one direction without fully announcing it yet. This awareness can feel subtle, but steady, guiding decisions almost intuitively, encouraging a softer openness where emotional fairness becomes important. It becomes harder to ignore the desire for something mutual, something where understanding flows in both directions, not as obligation, but as genuine willingness. And as this inner orientation continues, The path forward begins to shape itself around authenticity rather than caution, suggesting that emotional balance is no longer simply hoped for, but quietly becoming something both sides are beginning to allow. And as this emotional balance begins to feel more real, there is also a quiet acceptance forming around the truth that clarity sometimes requires letting go of the illusion that everything could remain exactly as it once was. It can feel like recognizing that the mind has already crossed a threshold where pretending not to know what is felt would only create deeper inner conflict. Something here begins to acknowledge that honesty often asks for courage, not in the sense of confrontation, but in the willingness to allow a truth to stand on its own, even if it changes the shape of what comes next. There may be a moment of realizing that avoiding clarity only prolongs uncertainty, like holding a thought at the edge of awareness, knowing it is ready to be spoken. It can resemble the quiet strength of facing what is real, even if that reality asks for adjustments, for vulnerability, or for the release of expectation that once felt necessary for protection. The emotional atmosphere here feels more focused, as if hesitation is gradually giving way to decisiveness, not through pressure, but through the recognition that something meaningful deserves transparency. And as this inner alignment continues, the situation begins to feel more grounded, supported by the understanding that truth, once acknowledged, has a way of naturally guiding what unfolds next. And as this truth settles more fully into awareness, there is also a quiet recognition of how much inner tension was carried simply from wanting things to work, from hoping the connection would eventually reveal its sincerity. It can feel like realizing that much of the worry was never truly about fear of loss, but about the longing to feel seen, to feel chosen, to know that the emotional investment was not one-sided. Something here begins to soften, almost like setting down the mental pressure that once replayed every possibility. Understanding now that clarity itself brings relief. Even when the path required patience to reach this point, there is a sense of emotional validation forming, similar to being quietly acknowledged, like standing in a moment where effort is finally recognized, where what was once doubted now begins to feel meaningful rather than uncertain. The inner struggle that once created restlessness begins to transform into confidence, not loud or dramatic, but steady, as if the heart no longer feels the need to defend its own value. This realization carries a gentle sense of restoration, where emotional resilience becomes visible not through force, but through the simple understanding that what was genuine never needed to be proven repeatedly. And within this deeper recognition, something feels quietly victorious, not over another person, but over the fear that the truth would never surface, allowing the emotional journey to feel affirmed in a way that brings both closure and renewed self-trust. And as everything begins to quiet internally, there is a sense that this experience has been gently guiding you back toward a deeper relationship with your own inner world, almost like being invited to listen more closely to what your intuition has been trying to reveal all along. It can feel similar to drifting between what is seen and what is felt, recognizing that not every truth arrives loudly. Some arrive softly, through reflection, through moments of stillness, through the quiet awareness that something meaningful has been unfolding beneath the surface of events. There is a feeling here of being supported in trusting what cannot always be fully explained, like allowing the mind to rest long enough for deeper understanding to rise naturally, without needing to force clarity before it is ready. Sometimes the most important shifts happen in subtle ways, almost like insight appearing gently within uncertainty, reminding you that emotional growth often happens in spaces that are not immediately defined, and in allowing yourself to honor both what has been revealed and what is still unfolding, you may begin to sense that this chapter was never only about the other person, but about reconnecting with the quiet wisdom inside you that already knows how to recognize what is real. And as this quiet wisdom begins to feel more familiar, there may also be an awareness of moments when you felt emotionally alone in this experience. Even when part of you sensed that something meaningful was still forming beneath the surface. It can feel like reaching toward understanding, almost like extending a hand through unseen space, wondering if what you feel is truly shared or simply held privately for a time. These feelings are deeply human, especially when emotional connection develops gradually, unfolding in ways that are not always immediately visible. There may be a sensitivity here around feeling understood, wanting reassurance that what has been experienced internally is not imagined, but genuinely felt on more than one side. Sometimes when connection grows quietly, the mind may question whether the emotional bond is fully real, even while the heart senses that something significant is taking shape. This message gently reminds you that periods of emotional distance do not always mean disconnection. Sometimes they reflect timing, personal healing, or the need for both people to find clarity within themselves first. You may not be as alone in this experience as it once felt, even if the process required patience before recognition could surface naturally. And looking at this experience from a wider perspective, there is a sense that this chapter may be offering something meaningful for your personal growth. Almost like being gently guided through a period of deeper understanding about emotional truth, patience, and self-worth. Sometimes connections arrive not only to bring outcomes, but to help reveal parts of ourselves that were ready to evolve, encouraging a more grounded trust in your own perception. It may feel supportive to release the need to control every answer right now, allowing clarity to develop at its own pace, while maintaining compassion for your own process. Growth often unfolds quietly, shaping resilience insight and a stronger sense of inner stability over time. There also seems to be a thread running quietly through this entire journey, a sense that certain moments were meant to open something deeper inside you, even if the process felt uncomfortable while it was happening. Sometimes emotional pressure reveals where the heart has been holding too tightly, like feeling something crack just enough for truth to enter more honestly. What may have once felt like uncertainty or vulnerability may actually have been guiding you closer to your authentic emotional needs, encouraging a softer surrender to what is real, rather than what once felt safer to maintain. And in allowing that inner shift, you may begin to notice how growth often begins in the spaces where something old quietly gives way, making room for a more honest connection with both yourself and the path ahead. And as everything begins to settle, there is a quiet sense that you are being gently guided back toward a feeling of steadiness within yourself, like rediscovering solid ground after moving through emotional uncertainty. Sometimes the path does not reveal itself all at once, but rather through subtle signs, small inner nudges, moments that seem to align in ways difficult to explain, yet deeply felt. There is reassurance here in trusting where your energy feels most natural, almost like recognizing spaces, people, or choices that bring a sense of calm rather than confusion. What is meant for you often carries a quiet sense of familiarity, encouraging you to move forward at your own pace, allowing clarity to continue forming without pressure, supported by the understanding that you are being led toward what resonates with your deeper truth. As always, take only what resonates with your heart and allow the rest to simply pass by without pressure. Every journey is personal, and not every message will reflect every situation. But if something here felt meaningful, trust that it reached you for a reason. Thank you for sharing your time and energy with this reading. It is truly appreciated. Be gentle with yourself as everything continues to unfold naturally, and know that you are always welcome to return whenever you feel called for guidance or reflection. Until next time, take care of your heart and your inner peace.